Welcome to I Asked, Therefore I Am Season 3. How are urban farmers changing the world? When I talk to people about urban farming, there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of mystery about this beautiful industry. So, in this season 3, we are going to find the answers about urban farming. What is urban farming? What is it really? What's the potential of urban farming? What is happening these days in urban farming? What is the strategy of this movement, or how far in this strategy are we? So we are going to talk to many people involved in the urban farming movement, from the entrepreneurs to the researchers and policymakers, from the social vegetable garden heroes to the vertical farming operators. My name is Zjef and Acker. Welcome to I Asked, Therefore I Am, Season 3. How are urban farmers changing the world? Hello everybody. Before we dive into the conversation with Maarten Crivits from the Institute of Research on Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, there is some feedback that I need to get through, some reactions from the listeners, from you, on the previous podcast. Of course, there was lots of love, and part of that love is feedback on how to improve the podcast. The first one is multiple people, including my mother, have told me that the podcast is so long. 1 hour and a half is so long. Well, there's a couple of things I can say about this. Of course, I completely understand 1 hour and a half is long. However, you can stop this podcast every time you want. You can watch it in multiple segments. That's what I do. My favorite podcasts are Nerdland, science podcast, and Hardcore History. Nerdland is definitely 2 hours, and Hardcore History is up to 6 hours. I don't listen to those things in one go. I listen it once there, while cleaning, while riding my bike for 10 minutes, while working out. I do a lot of listening to podcasts while working out. So you can do the same. If it's too long, just listen to it in bite-sized pieces. And that's the last thing I want to say about this length. These conversations are super interesting. Now again, I'm recording this after the conversation with Maarten. You will hear it after. But this conversation is so interesting. Maarten knows so much about a lot of things. He's a researcher, of course, an academic. So he has a lot of insights that he's sharing. And our conversation goes on for 1 hour and a half. And I don't believe there's anything I will cut out of that conversation, because it's just in depth. So yes, 1 hour and a half is long, but it's a lot of interesting information. And you can listen to it in multiple pieces. That's what I do. That's what a lot of people do. That's the benefit of non-linear broadcasting. We can just listen to it whenever we want. The second response I got, and this one is specifically from somebody from Britain who's now actually in Scotland, because the actual words are, "This conversation is so informal, like a chat in a pub." Of course, pub is only used in Britain, and it comes from Mark Horler from UQuad, UK Urban Agritech, and of course Farmtech Society. So Mark, yes, the conversation is informal, definitely with Nele Lauwers, the second episode, because Nele and me were just such fun people. But I will keep that in mind, because, of course, it needs to be more focused and more specific, definitely. But at the same time, I want this conversation to be light and easy to digest. So I think I just need to find the balance between having some fun and talking a bit randomness, but at the same time, a lot of interesting information. So I'll definitely keep that in mind, because my favorite podcasts are also like this. Like Nerdland is just a bunch of people talking and a lot of interesting science facts, but at the same time, joking around all the time. Then you have this other podcast from the BBC, the Infinite Monkey Cage. Definitely a recommendation, Infinite Monkey Cage by the BBC. They put scientists together with comedians. So you have like this in-depth science, and half of the time comedians are just joking about the science. But that makes it easy to remember. It's like because of the emotion of happiness and fun and joy, you are actually learning science easier. And that is what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast, with I Ask, Therefore I Am, to make this very intense conversations, that's very in-depth information and knowledge, to make it easy to remember, easy to consume. And of course, I'm not BBC yet, I'm not Nerdland yet. These podcasts are very professional. We're at the beginning of I Ask, Therefore I Am. And if you want to support the expansion, the more professionalization of this podcast, and you can support us by sharing this podcast with your network, make us popular and famous. Also, just monetarily by becoming a Patreon on patreon.com. Definitely helping. If you know sponsors for this podcast, definitely come. I would love to have some sponsors. And maybe the even most important one is just keep on giving feedback. Yeah. Love the feedback. It improves this podcast and it keeps me on my toes. Definitely. The last response we got, the last type of response, and specifically one from Ian Whitehead from the European Forum for Urban Agriculture. Thank you, Ian, for the response. He says the introduction is a bit too long. And with that, I will close down this introduction. Thank you, Ian. I will close down this introduction and let's get into the conversation with Maarten Crivits. Thank you for all your feedback, people. Keep it coming. Welcome to the third episode of season 3 of I Ask, Therefore I Am. And in this episode, we have invited Professor Maarten Crivits.
Crivits, it is, yeah.
Yes. Maarten, are you ready to talk about urban farming and the food movement?
I am.
And all that stuff.
Yes, thanks for inviting me.
I'm very happy that you're here.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Like for everybody listening, Maarten and me, we have a history in urban farming Ghent.
Yes.
It used to be a very successful organization here in Ghent, and it was so successful that most people, I think, involved in the movement really expanded their personal activities. I think everybody is very successful now who was involved in the movement. I think the passion
still goes on.
The passion still goes on. And we were a movement of researchers, students, farmers, and also social garden heroes, basically.
Yeah.
It was a good mix.
It was a good mix.
And you are also one of those very successful people who went into much more research and social food activism also, combined with that research.
It's true, yeah.
And now you are a professor, Maarten.
Yes.
I'm very...
now.
What?
Yes, I am. I am since 2 years working at the University of Ghent as a visiting professor.
You're going to be a full-time professor.
Yeah,
I see you're good at it. And I know you from the past. You're very good at explaining. You're very good at interacting with people.
Oh, thanks.
I think it gives you energy, right?
Heard a compliment from you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a big fan of your work. And that's why I also invited you for this podcast.
Yeah, great.
Maybe let's go over your curriculum.
Oh, God. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was like, I'm going to start with the fact that you did the master in philosophy.
Yeah.
Like a long time ago already.
Yeah.
And,
it was a while ago.
Yeah. And then you did the master in human ecology and sustainable development after that.
That's true. Yeah.
Before we go over what you did after that, I want to, you did philosophy, and this podcast is called I Ask, Therefore I Am, with a big wink to Descartes.
Descartes.
So what do you feel about the name? I never asked anybody that, but if I have a philosopher here, I need to kind of...
Well, I think... I haven't thought about it yet, but it's an interesting question. I ask, therefore I am. So I think, therefore I am is Descartes' approach, and in a sense, it makes us, the thinking is the boundary of the human being. That's the only thing that we're certain of. But I like the way you expanded to I ask. because when you ask something, you go outside your individual existence, and you go to the outer world. You go ask something. You interact. I think asking is crucial, because asking also it implies that you're listening. You want to know more.
Yeah.
So I think there should be more listening in this world, and therefore more asking. I would say nice expansion of Descartes' position.
Yeah. I don't know if Descartes would agree though, because he was very confined, I think, and he was questioning reality. So if I ask reality, then reality would be able to fool me because I ask. So I'm not sure. If Descartes
maybe Descartes would say reality wouldn't say much back. But, I'm sure reality will talk to you.
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm asking you, Maarten.
Okay.
Okay. After your master, you joined the University of Ghent Center of Sustainable Development.
Yeah, that's
which
true.
is, I saw it in the last years. It expanded and expanded.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
And I like that very much. And in 2012, you also started a PhD at Ilvo.
True.
Finished in 2016. Ilvo is a very renowned institute for research in agriculture, fisheries, and food. Recently, they added food, right?
Added food. Yes.
They added food. I like that.
Yeah, and I'm at the social science department there.
Yeah.
So also the social science department grew.
Yeah.
Now 60 researchers working on
60.
60 already.
60.
Food systems and agriculture.
Yeah, that's very nice. And wait, you finished your PhD there in 2016, and then you became a senior researcher there.
Yeah, well, yeah, senior.
Which is just fast lane to professor, you know?
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Okay, now you are a visiting professor, but I believe you will become a full-time professor in Master in Conflict Development in the University of Ghent with the focus on rural sociology.
Yes. That's
what exactly is rural sociology?
Oh, that's a good question. Not so easy to answer. Try to answer it in the class, but rural sociology is actually thinking about the political and social context of the rural context. The political situation, the political, socio-political, what kind of relationships there are in the countryside. But because the countryside is predominantly related to agriculture and food systems later on, you could actually say that rural sociology is a lot about the sociology of food systems and sociology of agriculture.
Yeah.
So it's a very broad topic.
Yeah.
But it focuses now on food systems, and we look at the emergence of rural sociology in the United States, and then coming to Europe, and some very interesting changes throughout the history of the relationship social scientists have with agriculture also.
Yeah. And now, I'm a big fan of that's why we have this podcast, Food Movement, and how this relates with community and with politics and economy.
Yeah.
So I think you're the perfect person to have on this podcast. Long awaited.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest challenge is going to be to what you know and your research to make it easily understandable for me and also everybody at home.
Well, with a shot.
So everybody at home, if you have problems and if you want Maarten to come back to explain it better, definitely let us know.
That's good.
And the last part that's very important, I think, for people to know about you is that you're part of the Food Council in Ghent.
Yeah, true. Yeah, since actually when we had the urban farm in Ghent, it was through the urban farm in Ghent movement that we also got represented in the Food Policy Council of Ghent.
Yeah.
And there, I'm there now. It's already 9 years, I think. And it's going in a good direction, I think. Cities started thinking about food production. I think in Belgium about 10 years ago, and they learn also about how difficult it is to change the food system.
Yeah.
But it's going in a good direction, I think.
Yeah. And so with the Food Council, you directly kind of guide or what do you say? There's I'm looking for the word. With Food Council, you directly
So like-
advise the city of Ghent.
Yeah, well, the city of Ghent has a local food strategy, like more and more cities have these days. And the local food strategy is kind of like a strategy with goals, with strategic goals and operational goals related to food systems. So it's about short supply chain, getting more farmers to get their produce to the city. It's about the social dimension of food. It's about reducing food waste. And then you have a food council. And in the food council, you have lots of stakeholders. There are farmer organizations and some farmers, NGOs, different policymakers, civil society.
Arno from Lokaal is also in there.
Yes, Arno
restaurant.
is there.
Yeah.
Yes, restaurants. Sabine used to be there, but she stopped. So it's a mix of entrepreneurs in the food system and organizations related to the food system.
Yeah.
And it's really so the city has this local food strategy, and they have engaged themselves to realize some of the goals. But they I would say they really need not only those organizations within the Food Policy Council, but they would really need the larger city. Also the urban farming community to realize that food strategy.
Yeah.
Because I truly believe that by only doing it in a top-down way, only the city, organizing such a strategy is not going to make it. It's not going to be enough. I think really you need citizens of Ghent in that thinking along in that food strategy.
Yeah. Well, it's much more. How do you say? It used to be more top down. Like if we go 50 years ago, society was more top down. City food strategy would be like the city will employ this amount of people to do this, and now they're more like trying to support what's already there.
Also,
and organizing it. That's basically what the Food Council tries to do or does.
Yeah, well, they do several things. Well, one thing that they do is, for instance, they provide some money for innovations in the food system. So, that they can really they can have some seed money. I don't know if you say it like that, or some startup money to really do some innovations that they wouldn't otherwise not do.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that the Food Council does, I think, very nicely, to provide this kind of budget for local innovations.
Okay.
And several interesting things come out of it. Just to give an example, you have, for instance, this veggie halal. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, veggie halal.
They've been supported by the Food Council.
Oh, that's nice.
So many other examples I should think of.
Yeah. We'll see much more of the Food Council in the future, and Ghent en Garde is also the food strategy. That's what it's called by the city.
Yeah, Ghent en Garde is the food strategy indeed, and you can go to the website and see what it entails.
Yeah.
And I can say many more things about it, but I would say it's really crucial to really engage citizens of Ghent more into it, because not everybody knows it.
That's going to be main theme through this podcast, right? Because I notice, well, you are a researcher in social sciences related to food. You are a professor in rural sociology. You're a bit of an activist too.
Yeah.
And then of course part of the Food Council. I believe like sustainability and food sustainability is closely related to, I would say, social justice. And you're not the only one saying this. There's a lot of social justice movements or even sustainability activists that say the same, like social justice is closely connected to sustainability. And I tend to believe the same. But why do you believe so?
Well, it's actually two things coming together in my life, I guess. On the one hand, I've studied philosophy, and then later on I became interested in political philosophy. So, the philosophy laying behind for instance, I became very much interested in democratic systems. How does the democracy work? What is the role of the public sphere, for instance, of citizens deliberating within a public sphere, talking to each other, exchanging ideas, and at the same time being critical or supportive, but also being able to speak true to power, to be critical to government. So that's one thread. And then the other thread is that I've been working on food systems in Ilvo, on agriculture. And actually, I've been working in both in urban farming as well as in more rural farming. And those two things came together. And they come together in, I would say, in a concept like food democracy, for instance. Food sovereignty. And there I think this is really what fascinates me, how to connect thinking on democracy with thinking on food systems and agriculture.
What do you believe, like, can we have one without the other, a sustainable food system without food democracy, or do we need them both? I
would say we really need them right now. We really need some more food democracy in our food system. I mean, we are far away from food democracy today, to be honest. You see an increasing monopolization of agri-food industry. Decision power being dispersed over less and less actors, and I think that's the opposite of this democratization.
Yeah.
We hardly know where the food comes from. We are not concerned with decisions being made in the food system, and so I think we are in need of food democracy. And the concept of food citizenship is interesting because it expands the notion of food consumer. So we are ingrained. Society is ingrained with the idea that we are consumers. And so that leaves us with a position where, at the end of the food chain, we can decide what we will buy. So we can either buy something because based on price, because it's that's an important factor, or based on health, or based on sustainability choices. Mm-hmm. But it remains related to only that last step. You go to the shop and that's it. Well, food citizenship is the idea that you think about all the steps of the food system. Where is food processed? How does food travel around the world? How is food produced? Where is it produced? By using which farming styles? How can we contribute to local food systems? These are a lot of interesting questions that are not, when you're a food consumer, you're mainly you don't address those questions. Yeah. But if you're a food citizen, then these become relevant questions, and I think that's really a mind shift that we need. That we need to consider ourselves as as an actor that can co-create the food system, and not only an actor that is at the end of the road where everything is being done by others, anonymously, basically, and then in the end we can can choose. So I really like this shift of thinking, and I would say that's also a step towards more food democracy.
Yeah, well, I like the idea, because that's also why I'm a bit into urban farming, because it is foundational to our civilization. Like food, you cannot get rid of food in a civilization. It's not to our existence. No. Like you have water, you have food,
it's and basic requirement.
Even electricity or shelter, you don't necessarily need.
Not in that sense. Yeah.
But but for me, shelter is also kind of foundational.
Yeah, want to be sheltered.
But we can live without shelter, but we cannot live without food or water.
No, true. It's the most basic, essential thing, and it's also much more than only a basic need. It can be a very enriching experience to be, producing food, eating food, cooking food.
Well, we see a lot of foodies popping up on Instagram, and
and that's for good reasons.
Yeah.
I like it.
I think it's because it's so foundational. Because like the experience of eating is so important to us, evolutionary, but also just day to day, and it makes us happy. Definitely. Because it's evolutionary, ingrained in us that we need to eat. So it's a social and an evolutionary system going together and strengthening each other. And that's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
That's why we love urban farming.
Yes. Yes.
So my around urban farming, my first question to you is, what is urban farming to you, and how do you see the vision for urban farming within your kind of way of looking at the world and the food system?
It's an interesting question. And actually, I was thinking about, I don't really have a definition of urban agriculture or urban farming. Maybe you can enlighten me in that sense.
Well, there's two definitions, and the first definition is it's just food production inside a highly densely populated area, and the second one, it's more related to in my opinion, to the food movement, where you have talking about the logistics, where you talk about the distribution of food, and which also connects to the food production in peri-urban and more rural areas. And for me, that's not necessarily urban farming, but it's highly connected to it.
Highly connected. Yeah, well,
but the hardcore definition is not yet set by.
It's not yet set. Okay, it's like an evolution. It's like
an evolution.
Okay.
But if it were up to me, I would say just food production inside a city.
Okay. Maybe I would disagree. When I was in urban farming Ghent, I always try to, expand it a bit. Like you would say the second definition, in sense of the social movement. But what I think is interesting in urban agriculture is that you see that a lot of people from urban backgrounds, so people that do not come from farming backgrounds, not from rural backgrounds, they start, working in food production, and they do it in very, in the heart of the city, so or in the fringes of the city. And they do it in places, green spaces. They create new green spaces. They activate green spaces. And I think, that is very interesting, because they also take the issue of food production back to the city. And you see that, for instance, I think urban farming has played a role in putting food on the agenda of the citizens and the policies of a city. Making it visible. And in addition to that, I think it's very important that there is a connection, or an alliance even, between those urban farmers that are now, emerging within the cities and working within the cities. That there is an alliance with the farmers outside, the rural farmers. So that there is in that sense, urban farming can be, the reconnecting the rural and the urban. And in that sense, you can also speak of maybe urban-centered agriculture, where you would have farmers around the city making links with the city by sourcing, for instance, local produce in school meals or in the canteens of the companies and the organizations of the city. And I think, urban farmers can play a key bridging role in that sense. I would say the movement would really also include making that alliances.
I agree with that. That's the function. That's definitely one of the benefits, the high benefits to society urban farming has. But about the definition, like I don't really care what it becomes, because one day we're gonna say this is the definition of urban farming. But yeah.
Yeah, well, the notion itself also it entails, of course, urban.
Yeah.
I mean, that does mean that you're in an urbanized context. But
and I'm also inclined to use it just for the part of growing food, because in urban farming you have farming, which if you would define normal farming, it would not be necessarily connected to the social part of it. Then you have if you would want to connect it more to social things, you say like community supported agriculture. Then you have this kind of definition, but it's still with farming, and the farming focuses on food. But
that's interesting.
That's just how I see it. I'm like, I think by the time this episode has aired, there's going to be the conference of EFWA, the European Forum for Urban Agriculture, and they're going to talk about this, for example. Maybe then the whole world will say it's this definition.
Then there will be a holy definition.
Yeah, and then the next podcast I can say, okay, there's no discussion anymore.
But I would like to. It would be interesting to hear how urban farmers themselves perceive this, this relationship with the rural. I would think it's interesting, because
It's an important connection.
Yeah, and of course, farmers in the rural, they might also be, unfamiliar with what's happening in urban farming.
Yeah, it's true.
And but that's because I'm also very much into the rural sociology.
Yeah, and the previous podcast guest, Nele Lauwers, was really working on this she's from the Boerenbond.
Yes.
So she brings actually these rural farmers together with the urban farmers, and there's a lot of magic there.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay.
So definitely go on. Everybody at home, go listen to the episode after this one.
Yeah.
If you haven't already, like the hardcore listeners to the podcast have already listened, of course.
Of course.
Reach out to you. Like, thank you. Anyway, one of the very important things in your research and your work is like how farming benefits society and how it can strengthen society, or how society can strengthen farming. So it goes both ways. Farming strengthens society and society strengthens farming.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, well, it really is a two-way relationship between, let's say, agriculture and farming on one hand, and society on the other hand. And I think we need to go back to kind of new social contract between society and agriculture. And if you really think about it, there is a lot of benefits that farming can bring to society, in addition to food production. And I was thinking I could at least find 4 very nice benefits that are documented very well. First, maybe also very important for urban farming, I think, is food education. Today a lot of people do not know where food comes from, how it is produced, and what kind of systems we use to produce it. How do we treat animals, and how do we treat plants? And there's a huge gap there for food education. It's a bit missing today. For instance, if you look at the curricula of schools, there's not such a thing as food education. And on the other,
you need to get lucky with a teacher. There are some teachers.
If you have a lucky that this specific teacher is fascinated with food and agriculture, then this person can bring it in, but in the curricula as such, it's not included. And so I think there's a lot of potential there to include that, and there's lots of problems related to food, to obesity, to malnutrition, and to lack of food literacy. So I think farming can play a key role in there, and but farmers need time to invest in being pedagogic, having organizing the education. So that's one. The second one I was thinking about is you could call green care. So it's about well-being, and research has shown that working in the fields, working in the green fields, being in nature, what farming often is really good for our well-being. And this, it's not just a theoretical problem; it's a really concrete issue. I looked it up, and at the end of 2020 in Belgium, there were 112,000 people down at home with burnout.
112,000.
112,000 people.
And that's how much of the working population? I think we have 5 million working.
No, it's Belgium.
So, no, the working population.
Yeah, the working population.
Like 5 million or 6 million?
Must be something
so
like
that.
100,000. You calculate it.
Yeah.
It's about...
It's 3%, something like 2-3%.
Yeah, it's amazing, and 112,000 people, and it's actually it's an increase of, I don't know, I look it up, 40% I think with 2016. Yeah, 40% with 2016.
An increase of 40%, more burnouts.
More burnouts. Yeah, and
but isn't that those numbers, aren't they? Because burnouts in the recent years have been more accepted. So when people got home and sick,
could be
they are been diagnosed more with a burnout, and before they would just like, I'm going to quit my job and just
that could also be. I don't know. That would be interesting to talk about with a psychologist or people, because I think work-life balance is really under pressure.
Yeah,
it is under pressure. Also, another number was saying that the people that felt resilient, and resilience means that they are ready to cope with everything.
Yeah.
That this number went down from 1 to 3 persons to 1 into 5 persons.
Yeah.
So
is it also connected? If we go to philosophy again, is it connected to the meaning of life? I often say that it's like my parents and your parents probably. I think we're a similar generation. You're from the 80s still, right?
Yes.
Yes, so you're 80s. And our parents, they grew up in the society that was expanding, was growing. Your houses became 5 times the price that you bought them.
Yeah, it was a prosperous times.
In prosperous times, all of a sudden you have cell phones, and all of a sudden you have smartphones, internet. Like you saw society developing so fast. I see the same in China. Like China has gone from like super poor people to like this huge middle class, and they're super advanced in technology. Like a friend of mine, Chinese friends of mine, says my parents were eating dirt, so they wouldn't feel hungry. And now they have supermarkets and stuff. So in China, you have a very similar vibe, but that vibe has already died down a bit in our society. So people now working 9 to 5, they're like, why am I working? To pay a house that's taking so much of my wage, and that's like super expensive, and I have to work for this for 20, 30 years. And then I can go on a holiday once a year, but it's not sustainable anymore. So like
a lot of
yeah, there's the meaning of why we work is so it has diminished so badly that I believe that's one of the philosophers, I think it was Nietzsche, I'm not sure, like the person who knows why can endure any kind of suffering. The person who knows why he does something can endure a lot of suffering. I think it was Nietzsche. I'm not sure, so don't quote me on it.
I have no idea.
So I believe the why, the meaning of our society and why we work and why we do things has kind of been lost. Yeah. And that's why so many burnouts, so many people like, I don't want to work in the system anymore.
Yeah, that is a tragic observation. The question is also, are we living in an economy that has a primary goal to produce meaningful jobs? I'm still wondering if that's the case. Is it the primary goal to produce meaningful jobs? This is crucial. If you do not feel, work takes a lot of time of your life, so it needs to be contributing to something important, or you have the feeling of as you say, there needs to be a meaning of life. So yeah, that is I think a structural problem of this time. I would really say so, and farming, can play a role in remediating that. I really believe that. Research has shown that being in nature, being close to nature, working in nature is really beneficial for well-being. We seem to be drawn away from our natural environment. We need to go back more to natural environment. That's what people in health care say also. I was visiting this farmer, and he said that he got a lot of people that come to his farm, people that they have burnout, they want to do something else, they're struggling, and he used to decline them because he's a professional farmer, and it can only be like non-profit organizations that can do that. That's the law right now. I don't agree with it, because what he said like, actually a doctor should be able to prescribe 10 portions of farm, as a treatment, and so I think there's a huge potential there as well.
Yeah, because I think when it comes to farming, there's outside in nature and growing food, but the meaning of farming is very apparent. Like, you grow a salad because I'm going to eat it.
Yeah, also.
So the meaning in that is so much higher.
The meaning, and also the process of creation or co-creation, or how you want to call it. You it's very clear, it's very visible, and very rewarding also. But it is only rewarding, I think, if it can be done without stress, because a lot of farmers today, they need to be so productive. The labor productivity has risen, but their labor stress has also risen. So farmers need to really, work very hard, long hours, and then they don't even know for sure what kind of prices they will get. So I think if farming wants to, unlock the benefits of, of being close to nature, and seeing the growth process,
having a meaningful
work, only that can be meaningful if it's within if there's enough time, and if you're sure you get a good price, and if it's if there's time for some people coming to the farm and having a talk, not only being just like, okay, now we need to do that and now we need to do that.
I believe there's a statistics out there, but when we were doing our urban farming Ghent movement, there was a statistic about the suicides with farmers. It was extremely high.
It's alarming. And it's precisely also because, they are working 7 on 7, and at the end they cannot even get enough money to cover the costs. And this is a problem. This is a big problem because contrary to creating a meaningful job.
There was somebody a long time ago that said this, like, farmers, like, if you don't give them enough money, they don't feel respected. And then of course you feel unhappy, even like you work 7 days a week, much more than 9 to 5 generally. Then you don't get enough money to have a decent living, then you don't feel respected. Like, the money is just a basic type of respect, but I believe we definitely need to kind of embrace the production of food and the fact that people who are producing food right now, they're heroes.
Yes,
but we do not recognize them as heroes.
Recognize enough. And farmers can become, people that contribute to green care or that contribute to food education. And they should be rewarded for that as well. And it's not only the product that goes towards the market, but it's also these kind of services. And I think we underestimate the services that farmers, urban farmers and rural farmers alike, can give to society. So I was talking about green care and education, but I think there are even more. And for instance, I was thinking about this, this quote which you often hear. That's how is it again? It's we are what we eat, I think, or I am what I eat.
I ask, therefore I eat.
Yes. No. Like I ask, therefore I eat. I eat.
No. We are what we eat.
We are what we eat, and so that means that what we eat, it has an impact on our health. So if we eat junk food, this will, we will be junk. We will be junked. We will become junked, and our body will react to that. And then same goes if you have very nutritious and healthy food. It will also body mind will appreciate that. But that's not the only thing, because that's very individual, like my health. But it also, for me, it was a revelation to think about, that we by choosing what we eat, we also produce the natural environments and the landscapes that we walk in and that we live in. So, depending on which food system we choose for, or which kind of products we choose for, you will have the difference between a closed more industrial system where animals will not see daylight versus an extensive system where animals and plants are more interrelated. And this will have a direct effect on our landscapes, and both on the landscapes elsewhere as well as the landscapes right here. So if we drive around West Flanders, depending on
my country,
thank you. And then if we start eating differently, in 30 years the landscape will change. It's true, but
that you are talking now again from the food consumer part and not as the food citizen part. You said in the beginning, like, we need to be more food citizens.
Yeah.
So a big question that we need to answer in this podcast is how can we become more food citizens, like also changing that environment.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I think there it is indeed thinking about beyond only choosing the food that we eat.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It's also thinking about how does farming co-create these landscapes, and how can we support farmers in co-creating other landscapes, and what is our role in that? Do we know the relationship between nature and farming, for instance, in our region, and how can we bring a change about in
Not
that?
enough.
That I think we have to dare to ask that question.
That brings us a bit to the very important question that Koenraad Depauw in the first episode said: how can we quantify all these benefits? If we are changing our environment for the better, what is better, and how do we quantify that better?
Yeah. How do we quantify what is better for the environment?
Yeah, and for us.
And do you mean only the environment in the sense of natural environment, or all the more?
What are the parameters? What are the metrics we need to look at? That's a bit the big question for this podcast. It's going to be
okay. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting to have a systems approach in that. It's always difficult or a bit risky, I think, to pick out one indicator and then make that indicator the one.
Just like CO2 is the indicator for global warming, which
only one.
Oversimplifying the whole problem.
The whole problem with the different kind of emissions.
Yeah.
And same is actually, we have so many indicators, but behind that indicators, there's also, a larger set of principles.
Yeah.
And there, for instance, you have, for instance, these 13 principles of agroecology. There have been several changes in the principles. First it were 5, and then 11, and 15. Now it's 13. But there's like this consensus right now that there are 13 principles of agroecology. And it's interesting to see that these principles. Let's just give an example. So you have ecological principles, you have more economic principles, and you have more social political principles, and also about knowledge exchange, etc. But let's say, for instance, the ecological principle. One of the ecological principles of agroecology is to increase biodiversity above and below the ground. So both agrobiodiversity, and biodiversity below the ground.
Okay.
So the organic matter and the soil life,
the worms and the bacteria,
and there we come.
The fungi.
Yeah. You're an engineer, right? You know about the little animals there, that provide nutrients, and
it's not what I learned in school,
Oh, that's a pity, I think. But that, I think, is then you have an indicator. For instance, if you look at this biodiversity, you have a huge amount of things you can measure. For instance, how many earthworms do you have per square or meter or per hectare? And just that's an indicator of soil life and pollination, the amount of bees or the amount of natural enemies. That's an indicator of agrobiodiversity.
I do remember in my studies, we had to go to a forest, pick 1 square meter out, and then follow that for 3-4 weeks.
Okay.
And check out how many bugs do we measure, how many plants are there, what type of plants, and we had to do this 10 plots throughout the whole forest, something like that. That's how we would count that biodiversity, right?
Yeah, that's how we could count it, and you could compare, farms and in terms of soil life, for instance, and if you would make that matter. Also in policies, for instance, that would make a shift. If you would reward farmers for increasing their soil life, for instance, right now they're not rewarded a lot.
It's a big question, but for later in this podcast, how do we reward this?
Yeah,
it's more of a political, philosophical question.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
First, the metrics, like biodiversity is one.
Yeah, biodiversity is one. And then you go towards. For instance, another one, another important principle of agroecology is to close loops, to close nutrient cycles. I'm just thinking out loud here, but a measure could be, in order to close the loops, another principle is actually to reduce the external inputs. So to be as autonomous as possible in your farm.
To have a local ecosystem,
yes,
a local circular economy, basically. Yeah.
Yes. So to produce your own feed would be an example of that.
Produce your own fertilizer.
Produce your own fertilizer.
Because that's a big input in farming these days.
Definitely. So the feed and the fertilizer, they're often the water. Where do you get it from? And for instance, that's the choice between importing soy, causing deforestation in South America, versus growing your own feed. And this can be poured into an indicator. What is the percentage of feed grown in your own region? And
I like that indicator because like I've been in the vertical farming movement a lot of times, and 90% of all the companies in the scene say like we use 90% less water and half less fertilizer, this and that. But then they're still using it. And especially the fertilizer and vertical farming system, hydroponic system, is not from an organic source, but it's from a mineral source, which it's being mined, basically. So I in that sense, I would love to see the vertical farming movement take the sustainability of their systems to a next level, where they work together with local organically produced fertilizer, where their water comes from somewhere else, or where it's like you said, a closed loop system.
Yes.
And that would be great to see, because it expands the possibility of this closed loop systems to make a city more sustainable, to be part of a sustainability.
But what about urban farming systems? Can they make use of other external inputs than they do right now?
Like, you're talking about vertical farming systems?
Yeah, for instance, vertical farming. I'm interested in that.
Like I know Les Sourciers in France by Marion, and she does a lot about bioponics. So basically, but I think she still uses mineral fertilizer, because she says like the combination of both is genius, because you have the organic fertilizer combined with the mineral source, and they help each other. But I believe we can have both in cities too, because if in a city we have a lot of humans and we produce a lot of waste, which has a lot of nutrients, and if we can extract those nutrients, we have mineral fertilizer again. And combine that with organic matter, which is then used. So I think it's possible to have that combination of...
but it's searching for but it's always interesting to have these principles in place. So the principle of reducing external inputs, for instance, and increasing the autonomy of the local. I mean, that's just, it can work out differently, in a small scale farmer in South America, or a vertical farmer in the Netherlands, but the principle remains the same. The principle is, how can we, make closed loops? How can we reduce external inputs? And I think, then the metrics come in second place. Then, what are we going to measure now? We try to follow this principle. We try to operationalize this principle, and then what are good metrics to follow up? I think the other way around might be a bit risky, when you say, we pick out this one metric, water use or something, and then this becomes the holy grail. I think that we need to think.
It's too simple.
It's just it's more complex, and there are some choices to be made. And principles are basically, like general ways of guiding your thinking and your decisions,
and describing a system with those principles.
And
measuring a system, or measuring a farm with those, or measuring a city with those principles.
That could be a step further then. And indicators can take all kinds of forms. For instance, we had this discussion in the Food Policy Council, about an indicator on, we need to have more CSAs, for instance. And it could be an indicator that we want to have, now we have, 3 or 4, and in 2025 we want to have 10. That could also be an indicator, to have more, vertical farms in the city.
The amount of...
the amount of enterprises could also be an indicator. But I mean, I think it's always a collective process.
Yeah, that's an economic indicator. So the first two were like more environmental indicators, biodiversity and input and output of a system.
Yeah.
Then you have the economic part, like economic sustainability is also an important part. If your farm is not sustainable, like our farm was in Antwerp, the mushroom farm, was not financially sustainable, so we could not go on. That's the amount of food produced is also that's an output of a system.
Yes,
definitely.
Yes,
which then in an ideal situation would like you sell the food, people eat it, and then bring fertilizer back. That would be
Well, there's some discussion about that.
There's some health safety challenges.
There's a taboo on that issue, but
but it's needed to implement.
It's makes sense. Huh? I mean, if it can happen in a safe way.
Yeah, in a safe way. Safe way is very important.
Then it's.
But it's the natural way.
For nutrients.
Yeah, it's the natural way.
And it's probably
we eat
natural
and
way.
we poo, and the poo is being used as fertilizer.
It's a closed loop.
Yeah.
So, but also economic principles I think are important. Of course, what's the and there are a lot of indicators as well. There, I was always thinking about this. You can have these kind of growth-oriented indicators. Okay, what's the amount of broccoli produced per hectare? I'm going to increase the amount of broccoli produced per hectare, or but what about the amount of meaningful jobs per hectare, or of the amount of income added value per hectare? Often we forget about these labor indicators. And a lot of how many working hours per unit of income. And there I think we really need to think about those kind of indicators as well. It's not only about creating more food with less energy, for instance. It's not only about that. It's also about working conditions.
And this I think this is the first conversation we have on these indicators. Like Koenraad Depauw in first episode asking, what are the numbers?
Yeah.
These are we don't have the numbers yet.
No.
But
it's more a reflection on how to think about the numbers, I guess.
Yeah, and we need I'm pretty sure there's some research out there, specifying, like you said, the 13 principles of agroecology.
Yeah.
People are measuring those.
Yeah, well, if you go further than to literature, you see that, there are several research being done that then start to develop indicators that are related to those principles.
Yeah.
But it's always, danger always, in any science is to focus on one number indicator and then do not go back to the assumptions lying behind them. Labor productivity, for instance, increased, but enormously. Labor productivity increased enormously in the contemporary food system.
But happiness declined.
Yeah, but what about happiness?
Yeah.
And if you only look at labor productivity, then you'd say we're doing a good job. And even that's questioned. I read a recent paper where they even question food productivity, labor productivity in the industrial food system. It really depends on. I think it's really important to go back to the assumptions. Another one that I always refer to is that the total added value of agricultural products in Flanders has increased, but the netto income of farmers has decreased. The average size of a farm has increased, but the number of farms have decreased.
Yeah.
It all depends on which perspective you take. Then something else becomes important.
And you need I guess, kind of a matrix and a kind of like a beautiful set of principles that are like, this is the low point, this is the low limit, this is the high limit, and we need to be in between this with all these indicators to have a healthy system.
Yeah, and we need to know those indicators. We need to emotionally connect with those indicators, because that's a real problem. I mean, social scientists and scientists in general, they just they keep on producing indicators and measuring, but who emotionally connects with those indicators? And that I think is the next step.
That is the next step. That brings us to the next part of this conversation, the philosophical, political, economical part. Like, how do we emotionally connect? How do we value all those indicators? Because it's one thing to have those indicators, but how to apply them. But before we get there, it's time for our first quiz intermezzo.
Okay.
We're talking about metrics, and one of the metrics we haven't talked about is the amount of, for example, organic farming. Like how much of the farmland is organic.
Oh, okay.
That's an indicator, right? Like in the future, it's probably going to be 100%. But for now, the question is, worldwide in 2019, the Research Institute of Organic Agriculture and IFOAM, they counted all the organic land, the organic farming land, and it's in total. This is going to give you a hint because the question is going to be, what's the percentage? But the total amount is 70. Sorry, this is Dutch. The total amount is 72.3 million hectares of farmland is organic. And the question is
72 points. Okay, something.
72 million hectares. In the whole world is organic farmland. What is the percentage in the total farmland? Like, is it? I give you 4 options.
Four options.
First option is it 1.5%? The second option is 3%. The third option is 7.5%, or the last option is 9.5%.
Yeah, I must be honest. My calculation skills are limited, and I don't know the total amount of hectares.
The total farmland. I don't know it either, but we can, after we know the answer.
Yeah. So I'm going to guess here. I'm hoping for 9, but I don't think it will be 9. It might be 3.
3%?
I would say.
You're very hopeful. It's 1.5.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was doubting to say that. I was afraid that it might be less than 3.
Yeah, but it's worldwide, right?
Yeah.
And there's some countries we can definitely feel happy about. Like I found that Liechtenstein, it's a very small country now. 41%.
Smaller than Ghent.
Yes, but still 41% of their agriculture is organic.
Okay.
We have Austria. Austria is a big country.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
26%.
All right.
26%. And then we have Sao Tome and Principe. I don't know where those countries are, but 25%.
Okay, well, there's some other countries. Yeah. How much is it in Belgium? Was it?
That's the next question.
I know it's. Okay.
But before we go on, an interesting knowing fact. Mm-hmm. You have a beautiful word for knowing fact, right? I cannot. Yeah. Anyway,
fun fact.
Fun fact. Yeah. Fun fact about the whole. There's 72 million hectares worldwide organic farming.
72 million hectares. Yeah.
Yeah. Half of that is in Australia.
Australia.
Yeah. And but Australia is not like 30% organic farming or anything, but just
they have a huge.
They have an enormous amount of farming.
Yeah. All right.
With half of the organic farming.
That's a fun fact. Yeah.
And I believe it was. I didn't write it down. I believe around 26% is in Europe. So we're doing not bad in Europe. But the next question is then specifically about Belgium. How much percent of the Belgian farmland is organic? And the numbers come from Stadbel, the statistics from Belgium.
Yeah. What year? It's recent?
2020. So 1 year after the previous research. So 2020.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe Belgium saw those numbers and said, okay, let's.
You need to know.
Before, do you think it's more than 1.5% or less?
I know it used to be less.
Less than 1.5%. Yeah. But that's how many years ago?
Some years ago.
Okay. But now 2020. We are already starting with 5%, number A. Is it 5.3%? Number B, is it 7.2%? Number C, is it 9.4%? Or is it D, 11.8%?
Yeah, I was thinking actually about the farmers in Flanders. I think the farmers in Flanders were only 1%, if I'm correct. But me and numbers are not the best friends. But I'm honest here. And... yeah, so I don't know that in the south of Belgium and the French-speaking part, there are much more organic farmers, more organic farmland as well. But in terms of numbers, I would say 5%.
Yeah. This time you're under...
okay, it was 7?
You're under, it's 7.2%. Okay. But it's very interesting what you said, because 90% of the organic farmland in Belgium is in the south, in Wallonia.
Yeah, well, that confirms then, I guess, the only 1%.
And for Flanders, it's only 1.5%.
Yeah.
So in this metric, we need the South.
Otherwise, it would not be going strong.
Otherwise, we would not be beating the Dutchies. The Netherlands has 3.7% organic farmland.
Oh, yeah, it's the Walloons here.
Because of Wallonia, we now outperform the Dutchies.
Yeah. It's another thing they do good. I like them.
Yes. Thank you, Wallonia.
Merci bien.
Yes. Okay. But now back to the serious conversation. Yeah. We talked about the political, the next part of the conversation is going to be political, economically, how can we apply those metrics? But before we get there, we need to already talk about what's happening now in government and food policy and how it's already helping the food movement, how it can help the entrepreneurs, and what's happening now and what can we do better.
You mean what's happening right now in policy world?
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of policies, of course, at different scales going on. So that's would take very long to go into all those policies. I was thinking about let me just if you just look at the way that policies have been orientated basically after the Second World War, you see that there is this ideal of modernization still going strong today. That means, kind of more or less, to be honest, blind belief in growth, but also in mechanization. And, blind mechanization is, everything that technology provides is going to be implemented and it's going to lead towards large farms. Yeah. Specialization, we're going to specialize farms. We're going away from mixed farming. We're going to specialized dairy farms, big farms, etc. Capital intensive also, preferring, large investments. And I think there are lots of, there's really a need of a shift in this modernization paradigm. And at the European level, you see some shifts. You have the farm to fork strategy. You have now what is called the CAP strategic plan. CAP strategic plan allows member states to design their own policies much more. It used to be Europe saying, okay, you're going to do that, member state. But now actually for the first time in history of the common agricultural policy, there's a possibility of Flanders in this case and the Walloon, they're two regions, to make their own CAP strategic plan. And they can really design policies. But unfortunately, the solutions that they are reaching to right now are still the ones that we know. The old recipe of modernization. Yeah.
And that CAP strategic policy by Europe, is it then Europe saying you need to reach those metrics of sustainability of food?
They also got 9 goals. You can go to to take a look at it. It's social, ecological, and economic goals. For instance, strengthening the income of the farmer, strengthening the position of the farmer, increasing biodiversity. If you look at it, it's really some noble goals.
So Europe is saying you can do what you want, but you need to reach those goals.
Yeah, and you need to draw up a plan where you show how you're going to reach those goals. Yeah. And I would say the disappointment there is that member states right now are using the same recipes to argue for reaching those goals.
Even the Netherlands, because I know the Netherlands is very...
The Netherlands is there's some different things happening there. An interesting example in the Netherlands is that they have these kind of CAP pilots, and it's what they did is they said, okay, there's a new policy coming up. So there's just called these eco schemes, and there we're going to choose some environmental measures. But we want to be sure that those environmental measures are not a waste of time for the farmers, that they can be implemented, that they are understood by the farmers, that they are really useful. So what they did is that they made 9 regions, and I think 9 or 7, doesn't matter, in the Netherlands, where they have these groups of farmers that implement for 2 years specific ecological measures, and they reflect on it. Okay, what works well, what didn't work well. There are scientists also, adding information, and then at the end of those 2 years, they give feedback to the government. Say, this is a list of measures that we can work with.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's participatory.
Yeah,
It's really participatory, you know, asking the farmers to co-design the policy.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and this is nice indeed. In the Netherlands, there is this kind of, you know, at least a tendency towards more co-creation, which is completely absent in for instance, Flanders. Flanders, it's still the idea that, you know, you have a very close relationship between farmer organizations and the government, and they decide a lot of things top down.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's quite disappointing to look at the CAP strategic plan and the lack of participation that has resulted from it. Because EU said to the member states, they said, look, you can choose, and we would like you to make it participatory.
Yeah.
We would like you, we give you the possibilities to make it, you know, a large stakeholder approach, you know, including citizens, farmers in the designing of the policy. But this is not obligatory.
Yeah.
So a lot of member states, they're just choosing to remain, you know, and that's coming down to the political arrangements, the old school political arrangements. And we must be honest in that, where you still have, you know, a maximization of dependency on external inputs. You know, I've pinned down the difference between agroecological principles and dominant principles, and in most cases, the policies designed would be the contrary of the agroecological principles, and that's quite disappointing.
Yeah, but like now, the Europe says this, in most countries, most member states, they just do their thing in the old ways. But if there's countries like the Netherlands that are doing new things and it's really working well, then the other states are gonna.
That would be an approach, yes.
Yeah,
showing that participation works.
Yeah,
and showing that right now the position that, I don't know if you followed it, but you have now this nitrogen policy falling down in Flanders.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's really it has a lot of negative effects, and it causes a lot of hurt in the farming communities. But this is a classic example of the most top-down policy you can ever imagine.
Yeah. What exactly was the policy again?
It's the nitrogen policy. So
a cap on the output of nitrogen.
Yeah, we have a manure overdose, let's say, like the overload of manure in Flanders and the Netherlands as well. And this causes, you know, nitrogen deposition to deposit on the nature reserves. And the EU has got these what's called Natura, it's called Natura 2000 networks, which are actually natural environments that need to be protected and that are very sensitive to the deposition of nitrogen.
Yeah. So
you see that the biodiversity gets distorted completely. And also nitrogen, I'm not an expert on this, but it has been in the news. Nitrogen also, so it has a negative impact on biodiversity, and it comes from agriculture, but it also comes from transport, from industry. But agriculture has a large impact on, you know, and so there's too much nitrogen deposition, and it can be also negative for human health. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the policy says we need to reduce the nitrogen, and what they are doing now is they have actually the minister who has not my name, but a similar name, but not my name, Crivits, and that has budgeted 4 billion euros, 4 miljard almost, in order to, and a large portion of that goes to selling out farmers from business. So I think
selling out,
well, giving them money to stop.
Really?
Yeah. So big farmers, for instance, are targeted here because they have closed systems. They have a manure overload, and so they are going to be, and they call it, it's a horrible metaphor or expression, the warm sanitation. They call it. It's a very strange word, I think, but it basically means that they pay farmers to stop. But I was thinking, what if you would have those, and the other investments go to technology. So they say you can stay growing, you can have a farm, but you need to implement technology that, you know, air washers, for instance, clean the air that comes out of the farm. But the Netherlands have done the same thing, and they're coming back from this because it's actually not so effective as they thought in terms of reducing the emissions and the nitrogen deposition. But what you see here is that they are selling out farms or doing this giving them money to stop. And at the same time, they're investing in technology. But what they're not doing is they could have taken that 2 billion or 4 billion euros and invested it in a participatory process.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, the example of the Netherlands. And then, include farmers in thinking about solutions.
Yeah.
And of course, one solution that's now very much under the let's say, the one solution that's not visible at all right now is an agroecological solution or short supply chain solution. Less animals, more income, more added value, and exactly also getting money from those additional benefits, green care, education, creating social ties, paying for biodiversity. And, it's so disappointing to see that, these chances are missed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we've been like kind of walking around the whole question, like how do we value all those extra benefits, the biodiversity, the social ties? How do we connect them to an economic system to then actually get paid for biodiversity, for example?
Yeah, that is a very difficult but interesting question, and that you could organize a lot of podcasts about it, but
let's make another podcast. I asked, therefore I am political.
Yeah.
No, economical. No, it's both.
It's both. Yeah, it definitely is both. So creating another economic system that is basically the underlying question. I think how do we value more? How do we value food more?
More happiness, food, biodiversity,
health, all those things, indeed. I think basically you could say there are two strategies there. One is to change the existing long chain, let's say, the existing business paradigm. But that would really, I think, then you would really have to, there is this research strand which is called the true cost of food. And is saying that if you look at the real costs for the environment and for social relations, the real costs of food are much higher than what we pay for right now, in a sense. So if, say, we could use the term like junk food, for instance, it's like I was saying that we also co-produce the environment by consuming those things. And exactly therefore, we should be co-producing in an environment that's more biodiverse, where there is more meaningful jobs. And that would mean that we need to find signals in the markets, if you think about it, or the traditional, market system, where consumers, in this case, would really be able to pay less or choose correctly for the more biodiverse and the more socially just options.
Yeah, and in the end, it should be cheaper. Now, organic produce is more expensive, but actually it should be cheaper.
Logic, it should be cheaper because it adds towards reducing the costs of that we have in terms of environment. But of course, we do not see it like that right now. But let's say you would really need to have a different kind of communication than to the consumers, and that's very difficult, I think, because you can only consume that much in a supermarket. But if you would think it through, you would actually need to go to a supermarket and you would go to buy a product, and there you would need to see how much of the product goes to the farmers and how are the labor conditions of the product produced, so that what kind of ingredients, where have they been sourced. So you get a kind of view when you buy a pot of Nutella, what is the labor and what is the ecological history related to this product. But of course, that would make shopping very, difficult, because you would need to reflect on. Yeah. Therefore, I think another strategy that's perhaps more fun would be to build local food systems from bottom up, where you have a direct connection with the one producing the food, and then of course you would know where it's produced, how it's produced, what the labor conditions are, and you could even have an impact on the labor conditions.
Okay, but I love this approach, like community-supported agriculture, for example.
That would be the case there, yeah.
But if you just talked about the pot of Nutella. Those are multiple farmers, not only Belgium necessarily, to produce that pot of Nutella.
That's why it's so difficult to the first strategy.
Yeah. And do you think I'm going to be very old school? Do you think we need just policy around that, like taxing food that is important, which is not very good for the environment? Like using those metrics, like if you want to import food into Belgium, then you need to have this type of farm, and you need to prove that you're this type of farm in order to be allowed inside. And if you're not, then your prices quadruple, and your food becomes very expensive here in Belgium.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thought experiment to think about things like that. They are politically right now not lying on the table, I think, but they could become important. But I would think the risk there is that there is too much focus on the farmers.
Yeah.
So what we would not want, I guess, is that we would have, making it for small scale farmers all over the world more expensive to produce food. Are they getting a good income right now? I think in a lot of cases not. I think we need to look at the intermediary actors and hold them responsible for sourcing. Where do you source? How do you pay? How much does go to the farmer? For instance, in Leuven, you have the Food Hub, which is a shop, and for each product you can see what is the percentage going to the shop and what is the percentage going to the farmer. This is important information, and what are they doing? What are the processing industries doing? How much did the retailers take? That is a question of accountability and responsibility. I think putting it on them as well.
While you were saying this, I was thinking about a glorious solution.
Oh, yeah.
Like we are putting, like, if we want to have sustainable farms, socio-ecological, sustainably and economically, we are putting high standards on the farm. So more pressure basically on the farmer.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
But if we combine that with large-scale community-supported agriculture, so basically, like, the dream would be like every farmer in Belgium is community-supported.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know community-supported agriculture, it's basically paying the farmer before he starts growing.
Yeah.
And so if he has a good harvest, he gets his wage. If he has a bad harvest, he gets his wage also.
It's like risk sharing.
Risk sharing, yeah. So if we would, like, in Belgium, every Belgian, it would be like a kind of tax, but you get food in return. So it's not taxing. Yeah. It's more like everybody is mandatory, has a community-supported agriculture share.
Yeah.
And you get this amount of food in return. Yeah,
definitely. I would say that's a very good solution.
Yeah,
it's not so unfeasible. Perhaps you would create networks of citizens and farmers like that, and you would it would be not only about food production, but it would be about a collective care for the environment and collective care for for local economy. And I think there we can benefit a lot from.
Yeah.
This is, I think, an innovation that's actually quite feasible when you have networks of citizens and farmers. But as I was talking about in the beginning of the podcast, I was talking about what is the benefits of farming for society. But it's also the other way around. Society can also strengthen farming. And that is by taking another perspective and saying, okay, when we support as a community farming and food, we are not only supporting the production of food, but we're supporting an environment, a community as such. Again, like the environment that we breathe in, the landscapes that we walk in, the social relationships that we have, and maybe also adding some meaningful work. Maybe it might be volunteering work or not, but this could be a very interesting local approach where you would have like an integrated farmer-citizen networks. And I think then you have a solid base. Yeah. And this policies will not easily would need to support that. In fact, but yeah, I think that's policy supporting local food system building. Yeah. That would be good.
Okay, now in Ghent we already have multiple community supported agriculture farms.
Yeah, that's
they have their members.
I think we have 4 in the neighborhood.
A couple of them.
Yeah.
And then the next step would be for the Ghent City Council to say, now everybody has a mandatory contribution for a farmer, and they choose the farmers based on the metrics that we decided within those limit of the metrics. And then you have the contribution, so the CSA share, basically, in beginning of the growing season. And in return, you get food from those farms.
That could be
that would be groundbreaking, right?
Yeah, it would be groundbreaking. And I think, I don't know, if to make it mandatory would probably be difficult, but to support...
Necessary. We're talking about our environment. We're talking,
of course, in a certain way, it is necessary. It could take many forms, but I think the government would be, and we haven't talked about it, but for instance, the city of Ghent has got a lot of public lands. So, and they're selling it right now. So, for instance, the city, I think they had more than 3,000 hectares, and they have almost sold half of it, of agricultural land. They have it in Ghent and the larger area of Ghent, and also around Ghent. This is a crucial asset to create community-supported agriculture in such ways. Land is so expensive these days, and we know in Ghent, it's almost impossible to buy a house or to buy a piece of land because it's the prices are so high. That is a danger to our community, to communities, building. And I think the worst thing that the city of Ghent can do is to continue to sell their public lands, and just very shortly, I've been for a few years now been activist or a part of a citizen collective called the Hungry City, and you can check it. It's also online, but.
The Hungry City movement.
Yeah, the Hungry City movement. It's also a book of Carolyn Steele, and it's basically the idea is that we need to consider food production and food and systems as an issue of the city, not as something happening outside of the city, which was the case in the history of Europe that's been described by I think Carolyn Steele, that a city needed to think about its food production because it was not a global system that organized its food production. It was very local. We need to have, but just to make this concrete is that we there was the case of huts. So it was in 2016, I think.
Huts is a name, right? Like huts could be like little houses, but huts is the name of the.
It's not little houses; it's more big things. The case huts is there was I think 350 hectares of land. I'm not 100% sure, but it's a large amount of hectares of land in Zeeuws-Vlaanderen, so in the south of the Netherlands. Suddenly, it was in ownership of the city of Ghent, and OCMW. It's a social services department, for social welfare department, and they sold it to one person. So, a CEO from a large company in the harbor of Ghent. And it's basically speculation. So he bought it because it was cheap for him, and he has a lot of capital, and he could buy so much hectares. And then there was a reaction of the citizens and of the farmers. And farmers said, "This is not fair because it's this public land. This is our land that has been, it has been in ownership of the city for hundreds of years. It has been given as a gift." In the past to the city, so this is actually our land. City of we need to think about this collectively. And now it's being sold to one person, and not it's not given to farmers, to local farmers. And what about the food strategy? We have this food strategy, promoting all these kind of noble goals, but at the same time, the city is selling this crucial asset of public lands. So that's when we said. And we wrote an open letter to the mayor and to the alderman. And in 1 week, we were 600 people that signed the letter. Just 1 week, and their organizations as well. And then suddenly this became an issue. We also protested. We had several talks. I also advocated it in the Food Policy Council. And as a result of it, we did get some results. it became a discussion in the city council. People started thinking about, okay, what is this? We have a huge amount of lands and we're selling it. That's not the way to go. We need to think what to do with it. Let's build a food strategy related to those lands. Yeah. And what the city did is they said, okay, we will listen. Well, partly because they're still selling a lot of land, not agricultural land, but other land they also have to invest in social housing. But they said, okay, we're going to make a vision on agriculture. We're going to make a future vision on what we will do with those public lands. Yeah. And I really think that if we as a citizen collective would not have knocked on the door of the policy, things would just have continued. Just have selling because it was, for them, it's just like it was a financial resource.
Activism works, basically.
Yeah. Food citizenship works.
Unite and change the world.
Yeah,
I read an article of yours, and you were referring to the student climate activists.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of those too, because they all of a sudden, it was on our agenda, it was a lot of people's agenda, but all of a sudden the world leaders couldn't look next to it.
Yeah.
And that's our activism is really important. And of course, after activism comes solutions. And then what do we do with those public lands? Then we really need to start a conversation, which is the long and boring work, but it needs to happen.
I think imagining what we could do with those public lands can be very fun as well.
Yeah.
And urban farming can play a crucial role in that, because there's also public land within the city.
All right.
So you have lots of green spaces within the city. I think several of hectares within the city of Ghent. Let's do something. Let's, for instance, issue a call towards citizens and say, okay, we have this piece of land. Let's do something that's related to commons, because the commons as a goal are actually in the policy agreement of the city of Ghent.
Okay,
you should check it. Yeah, they have the word commons there, and they have the word. That's want to increase the commons.
That's revolutionary.
Yeah, it's there on paper.
Yeah,
but if they would take it a step further and really realize the commons, they could start from those public lands, for instance.
Yeah.
And then I think it could be interesting to have a vision building. I think urban farming can play a key role in that.
I think, urban farming definitely. I always tell the story of our mushroom farm, Pot and Stoel, where we grew some of the food ourselves, but we couldn't grow everything. So we bought from rural farmers, we bought our produce to then sell in the city.
Okay.
Which was also a kind of short chain. And also good for the farmers, because we gave good prices, and then we got good prices, a little bit of margin.
Definitely.
And I believe urban farming can play a key role in that. Also for community-supported agriculture, for example, because now community-supported agriculture is generally you go and pick it up at the farm yourself, or you go and harvest it at the farm yourself.
Correct. Yeah.
But I believe next level would be you just don't go to the farm, but you own part of the harvest, and you receive it in the normal logistical system. You go and pick it up in the supermarket, or
that could be a system as well. But I think social relationships remain really important.
Yeah, definitely.
And can be really enriching to have that.
But it starts with a share. I'm a big fan of cooperatives.
Yeah.
I also work for one now. Woo.
Oh, great.
And you just having a share, like having money in the company.
Yes.
Even if it's only 200 euros, 500 euros, makes you feel connected.
Yes.
Which is already a start.
Yes.
And so many people will not be able to at the moment to be involved into the citizen food movement, but they can already feel connected by having a share in it.
Yes.
And I think
that is a very interesting approach. I don't know if you know, there is this cooperative in the Waasland. It's called Pomona.
Pomona, yes, I've heard of it. It's permaculture, agroecological.
Yes. And they work in this, exactly what you were saying. So people, actually, this is another system that comes from the Netherlands as well. It's called herenboeren. And there you have this new tendency of citizens buying their own land collectively and then asking a farmer to farm it.
For them.
Yeah. Or they can, that's a new model that's being deployed now in the Netherlands. And Pomona has been inspired by that model.
Okay. But and Pomona is the farmers themselves that found citizens to invest in their farm.
Well, mostly it's the other way around. So what's happening in Herenboeren is that it's most often citizens or people from a local place that collectively buy a piece of land. They set up a cooperative with a system with shares, etc., and then they invite a farmer or they pay a farmer basically to work the field.
I like that.
So it's like a paid farmer. It's different.
It's high involvement of.
It's high involvement of the citizens. But in Pomono, you have the interesting thing that the farmers and the consumers or the citizens are co-owning the cooperative, I think.
Yeah. I like that.
It's also an option.
And like, and that's actually a bit what the next quiz intermezzo goes about. But it's not about farming. It's about, I have become the communication manager of Woonkoop, a housing cooperative.
Great.
Where I hope, like, through this cooperative mindset, we get more rooftop farms and the co-housing projects. Mm-hmm. But one of the, let me find it. Yes, it's here. Like in Belgium, it's not a big thing yet. It's like to explain what happens. Basically, you have a group of citizens who set up a cooperative, just like you said, and then they collectively buy houses to then rent to themselves.
Yes.
Like, but at the moment, the Woonkoop has 1,100 shareholders.
Okay.
And only
a lot.
And 200 living units, which would be around 400 people living in them.
Okay.
So and the goal is to have 1,000 buildings, and that would be like 20,000 maybe living units.
Oh, really? Okay.
That would be amazing. Like, and because of the pooling of resources and knowledge, you get really high quality buildings.
Yes.
You get high, and more sustainable buildings, and you have community and this and that. So lots of benefits there.
Definitely.
But lots of what they are always using is like, this is somewhere between renting and buying. It's like woonkooping.
Oh, yes. So you don't own it in a full sense.
Yeah, you own it a bit. You own a part of it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're not just renting from something you are not connected to. So
it's also for future generations to ensure that they can also get access to housing.
They want to stabilize the markets, as simple as that.
Yeah.
So to stabilize
keep the prices also
normal. Yeah. They want to lower the prices, but for now that's hard.
Yeah.
But the bigger the size, the easier that's going to be. But the example they always use is Zurich. Zurich in Switzerland, they have this as a much more normal thing.
Already. Yeah.
Like the question for this quiz intermezzo is going to be how big a percentage of the housing market is in hands of these type of cooperatives. They call it non-profit housing.
Okay.
Basically, because the goal of renting out the place is not to make profit, but to have a good community, to have a sustainable housing. And the question is, how much of the housing market? Is it A, 10%? Is it B, 20%? Is it C, 30%? Or is it 40% of the housing market is owned by these housing cooperatives in Zurich?
Well, I guess you must have picked out an example which has some excellent numbers there. But I would say 40% is quite high. I would say, I don't know, 20?
That is completely correct.
All right.
Yeah.
Great. At least one correct.
These numbers might be outdated because they did a referendum a couple of years ago in Switzerland or in Zurich specifically. I'm not sure if it's countrywide. And they want to raise that number to 33%.
Okay.
So it might already be more than 20% as we speak now.
That's a huge amount of, that's...
Yeah. And it's
a huge amount of houses.
The renting prices are 20% lower than
in Switzerland.
In Zurich, yeah.
Because that's 20% and 20% lower in Zurich than in the other.
In normal housing in Zurich. Normal. In like capitalist housing.
Yeah.
But this is like the combination. This is social capital housing, socialist capitalist housing, we could call it.
Yeah, but it definitely has a social component, an inclusive component, I guess. But maybe it's still difficult for people who are less affluent to get a share. I guess. But then governments should play a role in that.
Or
again, public lands and public housing. They have public housing, but they're selling it.
There's actually another possibility. That's actually what Woonkoop, the company I'm working for, is doing.
Yeah.
they're organizing specific living units for refugees at the moment. They're doing a couple of projects together with other citizens. They're actually asking people to invest in the company, but rent-free, not rent-free, interest-free for 5 years. So normally if you have a share, you get interest, but they ask specific people for these refugees to lower their renting price.
Okay.
We would ask you to not have interest for 5 years, so we can lower the price of renting.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that's
inclusive. That's making differences for people in other positions.
Yeah, and you could combine that with giving them a share in the company.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not only for refugees. You can do this. You can do this for homeless people.
Oh, yeah, or people just who don't have such large incomes. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. You bring them into a very strong social construct, because these co-housing projects are generally with a strong group of people.
Yes.
That are very connected. And if you bring somebody in who needs help, they can get with the help to the level.
Well, that would be really nice. I guess a lot of co-housing today is still quite middle class oriented.
Yeah.
And things like that can break that open.
Yeah. But the problem is it's middle class oriented because it's so expensive still yet.
Yes.
And then how the bigger it gets, the more affordable it's going to become.
Yeah. And you know, governments have a crucial role to play in that as well. You know,
supporting it basically.
Yeah, supporting that kind of initiatives, not selling public lands, but
for
keeping
example.
them to use for sustainable housing as well. For collective housing.
Yeah, it's collective housing, but we can apply the same principles to farming, like you said with Pomona and the herenboeren.
Herenboeren, yeah, it's a bit of a patriarchal.
Lord farming.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange idea, I think, because it's used to be like you, the Lord, and then somebody working for the Lord.
Yeah.
That I don't think that's very community wise.
People in the Netherlands, please change the name. Could be better.
Yeah, maybe. We think the name.
We call it gemeenschapsboeren.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
They hear it.
Cool. This has already been an extremely interesting conversation.
Yeah, we have been talking quite long.
Yeah. It's always like this. Oh, it's interesting people.
Yeah.
Interesting conversation. But I have one last question for you. The next people I have invited on this podcast are from Brussels. We all know in Belgium, Brussels is doing great on urban farming.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, most of the successful companies in urban farming. Brussels, go there. Le Champion de Bruxelles, Vertical Harvest, building integrated greenhouses. Peace and Love comes back every. Peace and Love comes back every.
Peace and Love. Sounds good.
I've never explained it. Peace and Love is peace from the peas from the vegetable.
Yeah, from the carrots and peas.
From the carrots and peas.
Yeah, and love is love.
It's genius. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. The next people I invited are from Brussels. They're entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And they have just started a federation, the Brussels Federation of Professionals in Urban Farming. Okay. So they are really uniting on a professional front. What do you think I definitely need to ask them and or talk about with them?
Yeah, I would like to hear their view on these extra, benefits that farming can bring to society. Like what do they think about green care, about food education, about creating social ties, about creating closing loops in a natural environment, and maybe also their definition of urban agriculture. Are they more about, is it more about, do they reduce their societal mission to being the entrepreneurs going to the market? Mm-hmm. Okay, or do they see their federation as a part of a larger movement? And what about alliances, for instance, with the rural farmers, as you gave the example of that you were doing in Brussels?
Yeah, Antwerp.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And if they do that in Brussels,
another big city.
Yeah. If they have the connections with rural farmers in Brussels too.
Yes. And about also with the good food strategy, you have the good food strategy in Brussels, which is a bit of this, the same as Ghent on Garde, but then in Brussels.
I think good food is one of the reasons. The good food strategy is one of the reasons why there are so many successful urban farms.
Yes, could well be. They have a very well thought approach in Brussels going on. So I would be interested in their view on their mission.
Yeah, their mission. How do they? Because one of them, Alexandre Lefebvre, has an educational farm, so the educational part is definitely going to be a big thing.
Yes.
He's also a urban beekeeper.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And what about, for instance, how do they relate with the neighborhoods, and what is their view on that? And what about larger issues in Brussels? Yeah. Do they talk about those larger issues, or do they mainly focus on maybe having like a more luxurious experiences of food?
So the middle class kind of.
Yeah, well, that's more like an entertainment. It's also fine. But or do they try to also look at the larger issues? That would be interesting, I think. From my perspective.
From what I already know of them, I think you will like the answers.
And I have to listen.
Yes, but I think it's going to be we're going to record in April, so it's going to be out in May. Okay. May 2022.
All right.
That's good. Okay, Maarten, I can only thank you a lot for this amazing conversation. I think it was very inspirational. I learned a lot again, and
I enjoyed it very much. And thanks for inviting me, Zjef.
Of course. Thank you for listening. This was I Ask, Therefore I Am, Season 3, How Are Urban Farmers Changing the World? Many people always ask me how they can support this video podcast, and I'm very happy to announce that there are 3 possibilities. First option is to share this podcast via social media or via your network in another way. There is also a lot of small video podcast promo videos you can share. And my favorite is to just send it to one person that you will know will be very interested. Make that person happy with this podcast. Basically, it's like a birthday gift. Send them a promo video from this podcast. The second option on how you can support this podcast is by just commenting, giving feedback. Do it in the comments on the YouTube video, or just send me a message, or just send me an email to zjef@iaskthereforeiam.com. Remember, Zjef is with a Z, ZJEF. The third option on how you can support this podcast is by becoming part of the community. You can do this via Patreon. From €2 per piece per podcast, you can support this. Go to www.patreon.com/iaskthereforeiam and make this happen. www.patreon.com/iaskthereforeiam. Once again, I thank you for listening to I Ask Therefore I Am Season 3, How Are Urban Farmers Changing the World? And see you in the next episode, people. See you in the next. Zjef out.